Hi, I'm Patty Goodman. I'm the faculty lead for cross-cultural communications in the Masters of Science in Corporate and Organizational Communications here. And I have with me Dr. Ed Powers, who's also faculty of our program. Why don't you share a little bit about yourself, Ed?
Thanks, Patty. Hi, everyone. I'm Ed Powers, and I am a new full-time member of the faculty in the Corporate and Organizational Communication program, and I oversee the public relations concentration.
And we're here today to have a conversation about communications in today's world, looking at the challenges, the competencies, and what's required. Sound good?
It sounds great.
All right, so let's kick it off with, what are some of the pressing challenges?
One I would start with right off the bat is the aspect of how does a communications professional today demonstrate impact? When I first joined the business many years ago, the result was, what did you actually produce? Was it a good communications product? That's table stakes now. That's simply expected. Now you have to be able to demonstrate that somehow you reached the right people and impacted how they feel about your organization or their beliefs, or even more importantly, in certain cases, that you got them to take an action, such as make a donation or buy a product or sign a petition. The stakes are much higher.
I agree. I remember coming from the social service area that communications is all about having the manual. You got to have it all written down and you follow what the procedures say. And from what you're saying,
little bit different today.
Yes.
Which is also a great lead into one of the other dramatic differences over the past 10, 15 years is in the number of channels by which we as professionals put out our communications. So there's, as you know, there's this new model that's emerged called PESO.
Mm-hmm.
So you have paid media for the P, earned media for the E, social media for the S, and owned media for the O. And within that, there are subgroups. And so the challenge to a public relations or corporate communications professional to manage all of those different aspects much greater than they used to be.
That's so true. And I think the other piece that's so critical is an organization understanding who their target audience is. I mean, today, you don't just have one group of individuals that you're sending out information. People are expecting to have specific information coming to what their needs are. I'm as bad as even knowing, when I have on my Facebook page something comes up about pets and I'm thinking, you should know who I am. I don't have any pets. Why do you have that? So I think, we're expecting this, that each organization has a profile and they're really recognizing what the needs are and interests of those particular profiles, which all comes back to the communication knowledge and how we're gathering that information.
Yeah, it's. I've heard you in your lectures talk about the importance of the iceberg, and
Yes.
I think it's absolutely so true. By the time you actually get to the real life communications, if you've done your spade work, if you've done your prep work, your chances of success are so much greater than if you're winging it and trying to create something on the fly and put that out on the fly.
Right, and you gave a great example in regards to hospital. Share a little bit about what happened in the hospital.
Sure, yeah. So one of the challenges that's always existed in our field and is all the more true today is the importance of telling a compelling story and really connecting with your audience. And I've been impressed with what I've seen hospitals do. So back 20 years ago, hospitals, when they were first forming their websites, would put very basic information up there. Here's our list of doctors in their credentials. Here's information about where to park and how much it costs. Today, they're seizing the opportunity to connect with the community in ways they never did in the past. I recently saw an example where a hospital put out information about tattoo removal and or tattoo regret. And they talked about, by drawing upon some of their expert medical staff, talking about, so what do you have to think about if you want to get rid of that tattoo that's on your back, like Ben Affleck?
Right. Well, and this also brings in a newer tool that's being talked about, which is a cultural audit, and the importance of an organization understanding their origins and really from that historical aspect of how did they begin and what was the community at that point in time, and then looking at the politics and how has the organization realigned and readjusted because of that political change And then going into linguistics. And, as you kind of mentioned, we're intergenerational on multiple, fronts, both from the profile aspect and from the employment aspect. And so if an organization can really look at their cultural audit of how are they communicating internally and externally with stakeholders, with that recognition that they have individuals who have been part of that hospital for generations potentially and feel really connected, but yet there's new individuals coming in that have different types of needs, and how they're communicating with those, and how they're making use of social media so that people feel they can share their voice. They had a good experience, they want to share that good experience. They have a question, they want to be able to look up something like, I don't know, tattoo removal.
Exactly.
Go to their local hospital and feel they have a relationship.
I think your point about stakeholder analysis is critically important. Again, it is one of those challenges that's different today than in the past in the profession. In one of the classes I'm involved with right now, we're looking at the topic of millennials and retirement planning. So millennials, retirement is so far in the distance, they're not even thinking about it.
Right.
But it's been fascinating, because my class consists of millennials, to get them talking about what would get their attention, and get them to start thinking about, yeah, maybe I should be starting in my 20s and 30s, putting some money aside for when I'm in my 60s and 70s. And so it really, from a firsthand perspective, demonstrates to them of, oh, this isn't just academic. This is practical when I'm in the seat of that target audience.
That's a great example, and that brings us right into kind of flowing from what the challenges are and what are the foundations of what a communications professional needs to know. And I know you have kind of that base 4-stage process. You want to share what that is?
Sure. Yeah, it's called, these acronyms, there are many of them out there, as you know, that describe the process model for developing a campaign or developing a program. But basically, it boils down to 4 categories. So the first is doing your research or discovery. Some will refer to it as situational analysis. What exactly is going on, and what's the organization trying to achieve? Stage 1. Stage 2 is the aspect of planning and strategizing. Okay, so now you've got your handle on what it is that you're trying to accomplish. What are the options, and what's ultimately the best way, do you think, to go about trying to achieve that communications objective? Then that leads into where people spend a lot of their time, which is the execution phase, actually creating the material and energizing the networks to get the information out. And then that leads into the 4th stage, which is measurement and evaluation. Did we hit the mark? How successful were we? What did we discover that we didn't anticipate? And importantly, how does it set us up for the next campaign as well? What do we want to try and achieve from there? Right. And I think if young professionals can keep those 4 categories in mind, or 4 stages, they can take a step back and say, you know something, I see where we went off the track. We jumped quickly into creating the materials. We didn't spend enough time thinking about both the planning part, and even before that, what the situation was that we were addressing.
Exactly, and it's so critical. Nowadays there's so much information, it's overwhelming to even, if you're thinking about the research discovery piece, you feel like, well, I can find things pretty quickly. But there is a level of learning on how to find those things, and how you make sure that if I'm doing benchmarking and I want to compare apples to apples, say at a hospital, since we're looking from the social service side, I want to compare a like hospital. So if it's a hospital that's in Boston, I wouldn't want to compare that to a hospital that might be a much smaller Jackson Hole, North Dakota, right? I need to compare apples to apples to make sure that I'm actually gathering valued information that can be, looked upon in the next phase, which is the creation.
Sure. One of the ideas, Patty, that your description triggers is just how big our field is. Mm-hmm. So whether you're talking about the specific types of functions and disciplines, so you've got public relations, you've got social media, you've got websites, you've got videos, community relations, executive communications, events, and it goes on and on. That's pretty large in and of itself. But then on top, you layer that across different types of organizations. So you've got corporations, you've got government agencies, you've got not-for-profits, you've got hospitals and healthcare, each has their own individual sets of needs. So one of the pieces of advice I think comes out of that is you need to know as a professional, where's my niche? What am I interested in and what do I gravitate towards? Now, it doesn't mean you can ignore the rest. You need to have a broad understanding of how your work, say you're an employee communication specialist for a hospital, you need to understand how the hospital operates, and you need to know how what you're saying internally relates to what the hospital is saying externally. But you can be spending the old 80-20 rule, 80% of your time focused on your core function, your core responsibility, and 20% understanding how it fits in the bigger picture.
That's so true, and especially as we think about millennials who are so easy in making use of all the different apps that are out there, and you have a great example of how Snapchat was used for a particular campaign. Yeah, you got to share that.
Yeah, it's a great case we've been talking about in one of my courses, and it ties into the whole aspect of how do you sort through all these different media options. And even if I love it when a student says, well, we should use social media.
Yeah.
And I say, okay, that's a great starting point. Now, here's the list of social media, and there are dozens. Which ones and why are we going to use? So the example that I use in this particular class is that the World Wildlife Federation, this is back a couple of years ago, wanted to promote that certain animals, promote the idea of need for support, certain animals becoming extinct. They came up with the very clever idea of Snapchat, which uses disappearing images after several seconds. They tied that into the aspect that these animals are disappearing. They smartly tied it, their target audience they identified in their plan was millennials, who are primary users of Snapchat. And so, and then they asked them, they had a very clear ask. They said, please do one of two things. Either donate $10, $20 to the cause, and or share this on your social media. And the results were that they blew through the roof on both counts because it was just so compelling. On top of that, going back to the idea of a compelling story, they use these beautiful images with these animals that you could see their eyes, and you could just say, wait a minute, these are majestic. These should not be disappearing.
And thinking about storytelling, that is, it's within itself a skill and a talent that needs to be practiced and kind of grown through the process. And what are your thoughts in regards to creating a compelling story?
So I think a compelling story addresses the audience first and foremost. Historically in our profession, we as corporate communications folks or public relations folks would sit down with the boss, the executive team, and we would discuss, so what do we want to put out? And before the advent of the web and social media, organizations, particularly large ones, could basically dictate the terms, if you will. Now it's about given all the options that people have in the limited time that they have, what will catch their attention. And that's why I mentioned that example of the tattoo regret and the hospitals latching onto that. My guess is hospitals never would have brought up that subject in the past, but they're saying, hey, we have a segment of our community that's interested in that. It's a way to connect with them. Therefore, we'll put together a very simple story that says, if you are someone who 10 years ago that got a tattoo, now is thinking about, how do I get rid of this? I don't want this anymore. Here's what you should know. And from bona fide medical professionals.
Right, and there are some foundations that just cross, the centuries. So in storytelling, you have a clear start, you have a solid middle with maybe kind of a crisis, something's happening, and then a close. And it's interesting how more and more, how in communications and marketing is making use of that foundation, how important it is to, in a very succinct manner, be both descriptive and have enough emotion or passion or excitement so that your target audience is really interested in that story itself.
Well, I agree fully. And one other idea to add to that, I heard a consultant in our business one time say to professionals, if you don't love your work, how can you expect your audience will love it? And so that you have to bring passion to it and say, almost like a journalist, where is that great content? Content remains king. So we've talked a lot over the past few minutes about what's changed over the past 2 decades, but certain principles remain the same. If you don't have great content, it doesn't matter how how whiz-bang you are with your channels, you're just not going to be successful.
That's so true. And piece of this is all comes back to those 4 stages, that last stage on evaluating and recognizing sometimes things just don't work well. I mean, you know, you're real excited about it and you think this is going to be a winner, and it absolutely bombs. And what I think is critical is in that reflection piece and really evaluating, okay, this didn't work out, but it's not like we want to just make it disappear. We want to understand what is it that we need to reevaluate. How can we be agile so that when we're going through this process again, we now know how to navigate our way through.
You mentioned agility, and that's a common word that's used that communications and public relations professionals need to be agile. I have a quick story for you about, I believe that to be true. You need to be responsive, you need to be on top of things, but you also have to be smart. A couple months ago, Keurig, the coffee machine folks, they found themselves in the middle of a snafu involving Fox News and the Hannity show. It turns out they were advertising. They weren't the only ones, but on the Hannity show, Hannity came out in support of Roy Moore as the Senate candidate from Alabama. A liberal media group tweeted out, hey, Keurig, you might want to rethink your advertising. An enterprising public relations person, probably drawing on the idea that you need to be responsive quickly on social media, tweeted back in a fairly short period of time, a matter of a couple of hours, thanks for alerting us. We plan to pull back our advertising. That led to Hannity's supporters throwing Keurig machines out the window and videotaping it and putting it online. So there was a blowback. There was a big pushback. Keurig was able to walk it back over the course of 24, 48 hours, but they learned an important lesson. Look before you leap, even in today's ultra-fast, hyper-speed world that we're in. It has to be that combination of be agile, but be smart at the same time.
Right. Well, and know your audience. So here again, you might have a couple of different profiles, but that particular show may have a particular profile that you want to be able to communicate to. So, no, that's a great example.
You also triggered another thought,
Sure.
Based on what you were saying just a moment ago. We've been working together relative to the capstone course for the students in our program. So this is the wrap-up of their 1.5, 2-year experience where they pull it all together, all the knowledge they've gained from the different courses in organizational communication, and they work with a sponsor or a client. And one of the aha moments that students in my class have had this past term is that they have quickly come up with some very good ideas about how they could help their organization. They sort of dug into it, figured out what was going on, and came up with the ideas, put their plans together, and then they realized they had a heck of a time getting the attention of the sponsor and, as importantly, convincing them that their ideas were the right ones. So just having the good ideas and creating a plan was only half of the battle. The other half was building that relationship. And sometimes that gets lost, I think, in the profession. Yes, you need great core skills, but on top of that, you need to have the ability to work with people in the organization to convince them that you've got the next good idea in support of the organization's goals.
So true. Emotional intelligence, right? Being
Intelligence.
able to really build off of recognizing what the needs are and also how to adjust based on those needs. And one of the things that I found is constantly, questioning, is this recommendation something that this organization can actually implement? Is it sustainable? So you might have these fantastic 4 different plans on how they can grow, but they only have one person that's going to be implementing these things who's already overwhelmed with trying to keep up with what they're doing in terms of Twitter or Facebook or whatever the one page. And I think that's part of the challenge is, as you're recommending, there might be a lot of things that organizations can do. But as a communications professional, you really need to be able to draw on that discovery, that benchmarking information, and think about what's the priority that you might want to take now, based on where you're headed, based on that organization's mission and strategy. What's going to be the biggest bang for their buck? What's really going to help them to move? And then they've got plans maybe for the future. So sustainability for organizations and communication strategy is really important too.
Yeah, agreed. And I think everything that we're discussing leads to the point that because the field is dynamic, it supports the idea of lifelong learning.
Yes.
The idea of just staying on top of it. And there are various ways to do that. But the ultimate, I think, as you and I have chatted in the past, is when you can combine theory and practice. So understanding why people may be persuaded by certain messages and then trying it out and seeing if it actually works for your organization.
Yeah.
That's the best.
And I think the other thing that I would add on to that is an individual's ability and talent. You know, those things that come really easy, or they get really excited about, or they want to read more because it's something that's very intriguing. I think it's important for students and any learner to come back and think about, what am I passionate about? How can I gather more information and that become my expertise, and really be a niche that I'm able to provide that information? Because as you had mentioned, communications, it covers broadly industry, and both at a microcultural level and at a macrocultural level, right? So communications, we're kind of everywhere. So
right.
we got to have some niche of where we're going to be able to make the biggest impact.
It's I sometimes will have a discussion with students that doing nothing is doing something.
This is true.
That the lack of action is an action in and of itself. And so it's being proactive and thinking about, what do I want to accomplish, is an important objective, so that you're planning for the future.
That is so critical. Well, it's been really great talking with you today, and I look forward to our future conversations.
Same here, Patty.
Thank you.